So we're going to come back and revisit the tractor just a little bit and kind of look at some things that may come up in troubleshooting, or if you have a diesel engine either in a truck or a tractor or an old car, and you're having issues and you're trying to figure out what they are. How do you troubleshoot one? How do you think in terms of like, how am I going to fix this problem? What do I even think the problem is? Sometimes it's a little different than a gas engine. Even though the design is about the same, the only difference is really the fuel. You do have some finer points. The heads on the diesel engine are made for a higher compression, usually between 18 to 1 compression, all the way up to about 28 to 1 in some extreme diesel engines. That in compression ratio, again, is how much did we squeeze. If you have a cup and it's this tall and it has this much water in it, it's half full. This would be 1 and this would be 1/2, right? Well, that would be a 2 to 1 ratio. If the cup was half full and then there is the same amount of air in it in a cup this big, that would be a 2 to 1 compression ratio. Your gas mixture at a 2 to 1 ratio won't even combust. Most gas engines, the bottom limit is about 7.5 or 8 to 1. In other words, you have to squeeze the air from something this big to like an 1/8 of that size for it to begin to combust. That's why you can put a cigarette out or a matchstick out, or you can take the end of a torch and sink it into gasoline and it's not going to burn. Well, a diesel requires even more than that. It requires about twice to 3 times what a gas engine does. But that's what keeps it running. There's no spark in it. So a lot of times when there's a problem and your car is shaking or something like that, people say, hey, it's the spark plugs. It's the spark plug wires. Maybe it needs a cap, or maybe it needs a rotor. Well, you really don't have any of that on a diesel. That's gone. Bye-bye. So you don't have to worry about that. So what could make a diesel run funny? Well, you have a bunch of common stuff that happens across any kind of diesel repair that you're going to run into. Number 1 is fuel. You always want to look and find the fuel filter on a diesel. And again, I think I pointed this out earlier. They always put it in an important spot. On this one, it's right by the engine oil dipstick. What is more important than engine oil? Really nothing. But they put that right there by it. You've got an on-off switch that's safety if this thing flips over, or if you have a busted fuel line and you're spitting gas out. You can go right here, shut it off, and you have no more fuel. Also, when you change the fuel filter, you can shut it off to keep from leaking your fuel out. This one has kind of a gravity fed. It's a higher tank. This back here functions as your fuel tank, and it sumps down. And then you've got a mechanical fuel pump on here. A lot of vehicles and cars, they have an electronic fuel pump. Well, you're going down the road and your car stops running, and you say, hey man, I think my fuel pump went out. Or maybe it's the relay that controls my fuel pump. Well, on a diesel, most of the fuel pumps aren't even electronic, so they don't really wear out. They're made into the engine. They run off of the cam, which is what normally runs the distributor on a gas engine. There's just a little gear at the end of the cam, and it runs things. Some of them have a little extra bump on the cam, so as the cam is turning, it has a little bump sticking out. So when it comes around, it pushes a lever, and that lever goes to a little pump. So that's how most diesel fuel pumps work. This is a John Deere small engine. It's a 3 series engine, which is pretty much the smallest John Deere that they make. You can see here the lines for the injection pump. So once again, you don't have the problem you have on a car or on a gas engine at all. You have a solid steel gas line. And once again, at least half of the problems you're going to run into on a diesel are related to fuel. And if you have a problem where your engine's running rough, about 90% of the time, it is going to end up being your fuel. Number one thing is to take the fuel filter off, get it out of there. This is real easy. You can drain it out right here. You'll start by shutting it off, then you'll drain it out. If it doesn't drain out, it's because it's vacuum locked. And you'll take this right here and turn it counterclockwise. And once a little bit of air gets in there, the fuel comes out, boom, you've got a clean place to do things. If you're good, you can also keep this shut and pull the fuel out in here and then actually pour it back in the tank. But if you think that your problem is dirty fuel, you don't want to pour that fuel filter back into your tank because you're just pouring dirt in there. And so you kind of have to think in those terms when you're working with one. A lot of people will pour it through a coffee filter to kind of filter it out, or an old sock or an old t-shirt. To me, it's not really worth it. I throw it on a burn barrel of an old tree or something that I'm trying to burn, or, you know, pitch it in a bucket with some used engine oil and use it for burning stuff. There are all kinds of other things that are just like they are on a car. Like if you're running hot, it's just like diagnosing a car. You know, one of the first things you want to look at is my cap. And once again, this is a cold engine. I haven't had this running for a while. It's been shut off. It's really not even warm to the touch. You don't ever want to open this if it's hot. If you're having overheating problems, there's your cap. What you'll see if your cap's gone bad, see that spring in there? It should be hard to push that spring in. It should take about 20 pounds of force to do that. So if you can just reach up there with 2 fingers and it just squeezes right together, I can't even move it with 2 fingers. That's normally one check I give it. So if you're having temperature problems, that's one of your first places to check, because if that fluid is not at 20 pounds or 15 pounds of pressure, that means that fluid will boil at about 240 degrees. When you have a cylinder that's pushing 700 or 800 degrees into the block, well, it's real easy to see how you can make it boil. So that's one thing. Another thing is you can have this seal right here. If that's damaged or sometimes it doesn't even have to be damaged and it can still leak. But if that's leaking and not sealing up to in here where that little ridge is, well, you're no longer under pressure here because your pressure is leaking out. And a lot of times you'll see steam or something, like you'll see a spot up here where the steam's been hitting, and that'll let you know that you need to look at this. The other thing would be, is your radiator clean? It's a little different on diesels because they make so much heat so quick, and every time they come around, I mean, it's a continual combustion. They run at a lower RPM, but the heat that they generate is just a little bit higher most of the time. A clean radiator, so we keep this one here clean. I pop the hood and clean it off with a water hose. I just look at it like preventive maintenance. The engine oil is also cooled on this model. That kind of helps with the overall temperature staying down. Another thing that can happen, like if you're having temperature issues, is your overflow tank. That's just, it comes out of this pipe here. If there's too much pressure or water makes it past the cap or it steams over, anytime that little spring compresses that was on this cap, well, your fluid comes out of here, it winds up in here, and they let it go down and come back up so that it's only steam that enters this. If it's liquid, it's going to be spit out on the ground, because you see that hose goes further down there. You can see it, there it is down at the bottom. It comes out under the bottom and leaks it right out. And what will happen is, this is kind of acts, the way this is plumbed in, they call this an expansion tank, because the steam comes in here, the steam forms into water or the liquid, antifreeze. And if there's ever a demand In other words, if this is ever low of fluid, it'll end up sucking it right out of here until it's full again. The cap will open and close, and it'll equalize the pressure, and the water or fluid just flows right up that hose right back into the same place that it was. So that's a pretty ingenious invention that we came out with, I guess, in the 70s. So that's like your operational, problems and stuff like that. That's one way to look at it. Another one you get a lot with diesels is I crank it up and it shudders, or it knocks, or it just isn't strong. It's running weak. It feels like it could be strong, but it's just not. Or you get a lot of those kind of complaints when you're working on them. And those all, in my experience, those all come back to fuel. It's at some point. And probably half of them have to do with cleaning your fuel filter out and maybe running some cleaner through your fuel lines. That's a big part of it, because the injectors on a diesel, they can get clogged up. They run at a lower pressure than gas, and you've held your dirty hand in front of a sink that doesn't spit much water, and it didn't get your hand very clean. And then you go out to the water hose where you're just blasting your hands with water, and all of a sudden your hands get good and clean. Well, a low pressure fuel injection system, like a diesel, it has lower pressure, and so it doesn't have that power to clean itself out. The fluid, the fuel on the inside, it's just not moving at a fast enough rate. And then you also get, to compound that problem, most diesels only run at, like you can see here, the gauge only goes to 3,500 RPM. I'm sorry, 2,500 RPM. And so that's telling you right there, well, if a gas engine can run at 6,000 RPM and you can only run a diesel at the max, 2,500 to 3,000, well, then the engine's only sucking half as much gas. So the speed and all that is about half, that the fuel travels down the line there. The other problem you're going to see with some of those problems we're talking about, man, they're going to happen right here in your air filter. It's really funny. You're going to pop open your air filter and you're going to find like a mouse nest in there where they've been stashing acorns or something through the winter. Or you're going to find like, you were working on some stuff and, so you have a direct open shot into your air filter right here. And the air filter goes right there down into the engine, clamps up, it's sealed, but the air comes in, goes through the filter, and this is the middle of the filter. Remember that cone filter we pulled out? It's hollow in the middle. Well, the filter's out here, and this is sucking from the inside. And since this is on the outside and this is on the inside, the air kind of equalizes and goes through it. Well, what we find is 9 times out of 10, when there's a problem, either a mouse or something crawled up in here, or you have like a bee's nest or a wasp nest or something, and they've built up in here because they had engine heat. A lot of times you go out and work and you're like, for example, you're on a gravel road and you're pushing around a bunch of gravel with the bucket. Well, all that dust gets up in here and gets in that filter, and that'll cause problems. That'll actually make a diesel shudder pretty bad. And it'll also, you'll get used to a diesel. You run the RPM up. It's not like a throttle that you have on a car when you're on a tractor. You can run the throttle up to there, and that's just where the throttle is. You're kind of presetting it. You get used to the way it sounds when you put it there. And when you have a dirty air filter, most guys that are on tractors, they can tell you their air filter is dirty just by the sound of their engine. And some people don't know that that's what the sound is, but the people that do, more power to them. They know it's time to clean it. Since we have a tractor, which is kind of cooler than having a truck or car, so we get all the extra stuff. You have your transaxle back here. What you're doing is, this is a hydrostatic drive, Anything that has a forward and reverse pedal is a hydrostat. Some of them, sometimes they're linked together on a pedal. You know, you'll see a pedal that up here says front and up here says back, and you can pull it back with your foot. So hydrostatic drive is something that modern equipment sometimes uses. You can see the top part of the pump transmission assembly there for the hydrostat, the hydraulic pump, and everything. They're all kind of made together in this kind of tractor. Let's kind of think about that and open that idea up for a second. This thing has a motor, and we all know that you can go to a car and you have a motor, and then you have a transmission, and then it hooks up to your tires through an axle. So you can use the power of the engine to drive the wheels. Well, a hydrostat is a little bit different. The hydrostat converts engine power into hydraulic power, and then that hydraulic power goes to the tires. So you never really get, like, if you're not gonna, you don't have a direct line to the engine, to the tires. So sometimes if you have a hydrostat and you're driving and all of a sudden it's like it jerks, sometimes you need to change your hydraulic fluid. You can always check it. They make it real easy. They usually put it in a spot you can see. That's where you check it. That's where you fill it. And you see that goes to your axle, and so that it's lubricating all your gears and stuff, but at the same time, that same fluid on this tractor pumps up front as the wheels move, and that's recirculates the oil that's in there, so that the same oil doesn't end up in the same place all the time and get really worn out. And then the hydrostat itself turns, and it's located under here, and you can see all the controls and everything that go to it. The control arms right there, that controls different spots, the transmission, your different gears and everything. Really cool modern design. I actually prefer the old design because it's easier to work on. If you mess up with a hydrostat, you're pretty much better off just to take it in and let them work on it or replace it, or to just go ahead and order yourself a new one and put it in yourself. So that's another thing that's kind of different about the tractors. And then you have, of course, coming out the same kind of power source that powers your wheels and, you know, the drive line. Well, they tap off of it. That's where your PTO comes from. So your PTO is right there. And, you know, once again, it runs off of hydraulic power, and it's gear driven. So everything being gear driven and running off of hydraulics, well, what that means is anytime there's a problem with the hydraulics, you can have a perfectly running engine, everything be tuned up, ready to rock, but you're a little bit low on tractor fluid. And next thing you know, when you drive, you're like dunk, 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 dunk. You know, it jerks, it gives you whiplash. So that's just some common thinking to do with that.